Welcome to Ask a Recruiter Live. I'm Becky Graham from Glassdoor, and we're here to help you navigate a job market that no longer plays by the rules. Today, we're talking resumes again, and our guest is bringing the receipts. She's reviewed 1,000 resumes, and she's counting down the top 5 things job seekers need to know right now. And please stay tuned till the end because we're going to throw her into the hot seat to get her hottest takes on hiring. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's guest. She's a former Fortune 500 HR veteran turned agency owner of Resume Official, and the reason why 500,000 people finally understand what recruiters are looking for. Please welcome Morgan Sanner. Morgan, welcome to Ask a Recruiter Live.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to have you here today. So I wanted to give people a couple more minutes to get situated. And while they're doing so, I thought it would be fun to ask you a question so our audience could get to know you better. So I'm curious, what's one cringe professional behavior you're guilty of?
So I did leave my corporate job around a year ago now, and I still find myself using a lot of the corporate lingo, especially things like boots on the ground, the chain of command. Some things just don't ever quite leave your vocabulary.
I know, but I mean, happy to have left it behind.
Yes, especially the Slack noises, any kind of notifications like that. Those I definitely do not miss.
I know the Slack anxiety is real for me as
It's very
well.
real.
So
I still
yeah,
hear it sometimes.
yeah, that ding. Oh my gosh,
Mhm.
you'll never forget it.
Nope.
Well, today is a Q&A show, so we have lots to cover, so I want to jump in. But before we do, we'd love for you to ask Morgan a question. So drop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and upvote the ones you like, and we'll be bringing them into today's conversation. And for those of you joining us on YouTube, welcome. We're happy you're here as well. Drop your comments, your questions in the comments. Okay, Morgan. The show today is called What Do Rejected Resumes Have in Common? And after reviewing thousands of them, you tell us there are 5 things that stand out. And if fixed, can deliver the highest ROI for job seekers. So let's start with number 5. What is it?
I would say that everybody is using AI to write their resumes, which isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is that they're writing really bad resumes with AI. So it's important to make sure that you're not just taking what AI gave you and just leaving it be.
Yeah, so what are some of the dead giveaways that someone is using AI to write a resume?
I would say some of the biggest ones are overuse of some of those words that I think we've all seen it use, like boosted, spearheaded. It uses very flowery language at times that sometimes doesn't quite get to the root of what you were actually doing. And I think the other one and the bigger problem is that a lot of times because it wants to give you metrics, I feel like it's learned that metrics are important on a resume. It will make up metrics that don't make sense. And also a lot of times it'll go in even integers of five. So 10%, 15%, 20%. And a lot of times too, I see it say things like increased efficiency of this by 10%, but there's really no way to measure that. So it's a very clear giveaway that you might have generated something from nothing, which a lot of times just isn't going to help your resume.
I mean, we can't put the genie back in the bottle. We should leverage AI to help us with our
Mhm.
resumes, but what should job seekers actually be using AI for when writing a resume?
Yeah, I think it can be really useful in two scenarios. I would say the first is kind of your research phase. So, as you are looking at different job descriptions and you're trying to accumulate all the different information from maybe 5, 10 different job descriptions, it can be hard to see where the patterns are, but I think that AI is pretty objective at measuring those. And I also think it can be good at being a little bit more objective than we might be able to. So, where we might assess ourselves and say, I don't think I have this skill that the job description mentions, a lot of times I've seen it can pull from your past experience and kind of help people spin it in a way that they might not have done so themselves.
Great. That's really important. I want to take another question on from the chat on resumes with AI. Actually, this is someone who is working in the recruiting industry. They asked, as someone interested in recruiting, do you think AI will be taking over talent sourcing?
I hope not, but I do think there's going to be, unfortunately, I think, a space for AI in really every single piece of the corporate environment, and I think in HR as well. I do think the tools could be used in a way that is helpful. I think they could also be used in a way that is not helpful. or beneficial to candidates or recruiters. So I think it's going to be really interesting what the next couple of years look like. And I'm really hoping we see some laws and legislation come out to match wherever it goes.
All right, let's move to number 4. What is it, Morgan?
I would say for this one, it's really important to have quantifiable metrics because really right now, as according to a cultivated culture study, only 1 in 3 actually have those metrics.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. 1 in 3. Well, so if that's the case, what's your best tip for showing impact and how do job seekers clearly communicate their metrics?
This is something I've run into almost immediately when I started reviewing resumes. This was a problem I saw over and over again was the comment of, I can't quantify anything. I didn't accomplish anything. I don't have any impact. So what I always like to do with my clients is play a game where I pretend that they vanished. So if you are working in your job, I always like to use an example of a cashier. So let's say you are working at a clothing store in the mall and you're a cashier. If you all of a sudden vanish and your coworker cannot pick up the work that you've left behind, all of a sudden there's 20 customers that haven't been able to check out and over $1,000 of merchandise that was not sold. By taking yourself out of the equation and leaving that task on the table without anybody else to do it, you're kind of able to really clearly see what would go wrong if you were not there to do that work.
Yeah. You call it the vanishing employee framework,
I
right?
do, yes.
All right, a quick pit stop before we move on to number 3. And this question keeps popping up in the chat. Cover letters, for or against, and how does a job seeker make one useful instead of a wasted formality?
Yeah, I do like cover letters. I say this because you just never know what a hiring manager is going to like. There might be some hiring managers out there that kind of skip through the resume and go right to the cover letter. But I will say I usually only encourage people to use it if it is on the application itself. So if they don't ask for a cover letter, don't try to force it in there somewhere. Don't try to email it to somebody. If they don't ask, it's because they don't want it. And I will say if they do ask for it, I would say the best way to make sure that it's impactful is right to the hiring manager rather than the recruiter. So think of the person you'll actually be working for and what problems they might be having. And I also really like to break that big middle body paragraph into bullet points. And what I like about those is they're not specific to one particular job. So you can kind of talk about your holistic career story in there rather than just one role at a time.
All right, so if it asks for one, definitely send one right to the hiring manager and break that middle body paragraph into
Yes.
bullet points. Great.
Yes.
Those are great tips. Definitely takes the overwhelm out of cover letter writing.
Yes,
All
so
right,
much so.
Morgan, let's move to number 3. What is it?
I would say this one would be missing keywords. So it is very, very important, not only for the applicant tracking system, but for the recruiter and the hiring manager, that they see that you have the right skills. Because really, when we're talking about keywords, it's not some magical phrase that you use as a key to get into the role. It's the skills that you need to have the job. So if it's not listed on your resume, there's no way for them to know that you have it.
Yeah. And what do job seekers over index on in their resume? And where do they fall short, I guess?
I would say job seekers love, I call them seatbelt skills. So they're the soft skills. So if you think of yourself going to a car store and the salesperson started talking to you about the seatbelt and the windows, you'd probably be like, yes, I would hope that the car has those things. So I try to think more specifically about what does this job need, not something that every single job requires. So things like communication, teamwork, attention to detail, those are things that I can't really think of any jobs that don't require those. So you really want to zoom in a little bit closer on what does this job require?
Right. And on the flip side, I love this question. Of the words people use, if you could ban a few words or action phrases, what would they be?
Yeah, I definitely dislike when people use assisted or supported. Not like I would disqualify them from a job or anything, but what I find is that people a lot of times use assisted and supported when they aren't 100% sure how to talk about what they specifically did. So even if you are, let's say, assisting on a project, you likely have some tasks that you have complete ownership over, right? You're never just kind of floating around assisting on every single task. You almost always have some form of ownership. So I'd much rather we scrap assisted and supported and really zoom in on what you did specifically and what tasks you had ownership over because your team is not applying to this job, you are.
Okay, now we've arrived at number two. Hit us.
This one, unfortunately, is sending the same resume everywhere, which I know people hate to hear.
Yeah, I definitely think we have some people in the audience groaning about this one. Given the fact that it is very time consuming to tailor an application for every, job application. So I'm curious, convince them, like, why is the perfect resume approach a losing strategy?
Mhm. Well, if you think about all the different jobs that you apply for, they are likely very different. So it's important to make sure that you, as a job seeker, are obviously very, very talented, and your resume is really a flyer for that specific job rather than a documentary of what you've done. So if we are thinking of ourselves as this product and we're using this flyer to try and get somebody's attention, it's important that we are really focusing on what they specifically need. And a lot of times there's not going to be a ton of overlap. I personally like the strategy of using one resume per job title and also per industry. So if I have somebody who's interested in social media management and digital marketing management, and maybe they are looking at retail and nonprofit, I would likely give them 4 resumes. So social media manager for retail and nonprofit, and then one for digital marketing management, one for nonprofit and one for retail. So really kind of segmenting it because that makes it a little bit more manageable. You're not tailoring it every single time, but you at least have a really strong baseline every time you start.
Yeah, that really took the overwhelm out of the whole
Mhm.
process. At least for me, it did. I'm sure that was helpful advice for audience members. Before we move on to number one, I wanted to make another pit stop back into the Q&A. Here's a really great one that has come up again and again in these conversations. Have you noticed the difference in how men and women write their resumes?
Yes, I think I mentioned earlier that it is often difficult for people to stay objective and talk about their skills, which is where AI can kind of be useful. I find that women, because I think we're told to stay humble so often, right? We don't want to brag too much. It's a lot harder to kind of get those achievements out of them. And even when I'm talking on the phone with them, I have to really, really ask a lot of questions to get them to start talking about the great work that they did. And I think too that assisted and supported comes back in a lot because again, we feel icky when we try to take credit for something. So I actually had a client once, she said she assisted with the development of a new program playbook. And I said, "Oh, how did you assist?" And she said, "Oh, I wrote it from front to back. It was completely her project that she owned." But again, we just try to default to that language that's a little bit softer, that's a little bit easier to hear, that doesn't sound like we're bragging too much. And I don't think I've ever had to have that conversation with my male clients. It just comes a little bit more naturally to them because it's not been taught to them to be any other way.
Yeah, that is the same type of behavior I think that probably manifests in the job search itself. A lot of
Hmm.
times I've seen or in how people job search or in conversations that women will look at a job listing and say, I'm not qualified. And, a man who perhaps is less qualified than a woman will actually go for that job. So it's just interesting to see how gender dynamics play in the job search process.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I've actually seen that popping up in job descriptions. I've seen some that will say at the bottom, hey, we're trying to make sure that our applicants are diverse and that we get to really fairly assess everybody. So even if you don't meet all of them, please apply. I've also seen a lot of companies now removing the years of experience requirement. So instead of saying, we want 5 to 7 years of experience in this, it just says we want somebody with expertise in this. So it kind of removes your ability to self-doubt your way out of applying for it.
great. Okay, another great question just came through in the Q&A box. Actually, I was heading in that direction, so thank you, Hillary. For career transitioners with
Mm.
direct experience, oh, without direct experience, excuse me, how can you best approach crafting your resume when you likely do not have some hard skills and have not performed the exact duties before?
Yeah, I think this you can kind of take 2 ways. There are, of course, some skills, depending on the job you're applying for, there are some hard skills that you are absolutely going to need. So in those circumstances, if you know for sure you are missing this hard skill that is absolutely required in the job, that is a really good instance where you can either try to get it at your current employer, you can do a training, you can build a portfolio that shows you know how to do it. So there are some gaps that you absolutely do need to fill in. They are just a requirement of the job. I think the other piece that my career transitioners don't think of is that they actually have, in a weird way, they have some kind of advantage over somebody who's taken a more linear path. It's really about explaining it in a great way, though. I like to call this the through line of your career. So making sure that you are clearly explaining to them how your unique background actually makes you a stronger candidate. So thinking to, if we look at somebody who has a linear career path, what experiences might not they have? What opinions might they have? And I think a lot of times the non-linear people have less groupthink. They're a lot better at thinking outside the box. They bring a lot more unique perspectives.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, Georgia followed up with a question. She's interested to hear how people who are at entry level or past interns get their resume to a place where they'll be considered more often. I know it's very challenging right now for people who are entering the job market. Entry level
Mhm.
jobs are no longer entry level. We actually had a conversation like this on Ask Recruiter Live recently. So, what advice would you have for grads now coming into the marketplace and how to ensure that they're considered for opportunities?
Yeah, I would say this starts early. So if you are still in college, I think getting any kind of internship experience is paramount. And also, I would say building a portfolio, whether that is hanging on to old school projects, whether that is taking some examples from your internships and putting them somewhere that employers can see them. Because I think a problem too that I've seen with a lot of recent grads is while their career centers are a really great resource, a lot of times all of the students are leaving with almost identical resumes because they're all working with the same person in the same school. So making sure that your resume stands out in that way, especially if you're applying in your local market, kind of close to your school. And I think too, just even though you are newer to the job market, this is, I think, very difficult, is to still talk about yourself as if you have those areas of expertise. Because if you go into the market saying, I'm eager, I'm willing to do any job, it's very hard to remember you that way. Because if you're good at everything, what really are they going to remember about that? So thinking about what your core skills are, what your key interests are, what projects you really excelled in that you could kind of package in a nice way, so that way, even if you don't get that opportunity, if one opens up, they remember, oh, this person said they were really great at this and would love an opportunity here. So kind of that recognition and making sure you are branding yourself right out the gate.
Well, we have a few more questions rolling in, but I want to get to number one. So let's tackle that and then we'll double back to your questions. But yeah, tell us what number one is on the list, Morgan.
Number one is not to let this job market change how you show up, which I know is very, very difficult.
Yeah, because we had a conversation prior to this live event about that hiring managers can sense that whether it's in an interview or through your resume. So, can you talk more about how that defeat kind of shows up through the process?
Yes, I think it definitely permeates through whether it's on your resume or whether it's in the interview process. And I see this too, not even within the job market, but I like to tell people not to wait until they're desperate to job search because that's another thing that really cuts through is you can feel that somebody is willing to take anything. So it's important to show up in the same way, regardless of what the circumstances are, whether that's you personally or whether that's the job market. Because again, if we are nervous, we're just not going to project ourselves the same way. And unfortunately, so much of job seeking is about confidence and being able to sell yourself, which is very difficult to do if you're coming in feeling defeated.
Yeah, so what advice would you have to someone who's currently been job seeking for months and months? Is there one thing that they could do today that could set their job search in a new direction, in a positive trajectory, on a positive trajectory, in a positive direction, excuse me.
I think I know this is really difficult because I do think it is unfair, right? I know when I was job hunting in, was it 2021? I had a really easy time, right? So it can feel like it's not fair and I shouldn't have to do more work in the job market, but unfortunately, that is where we are. So I do say that it's really important. I'm a very data-driven type A person to keep track of your applications and see what's working and what's not working. So if you've applied to 30 plus jobs and you haven't heard anything back, that tells me that something's off, whether it's on your resume, whether it's the jobs you're applying for, whether it's your strategy, something isn't working. So sit down and going through an assessment to figure out where is the chain breaking in this, because if we're not getting any interviews, that tells me it's your resume. Without a doubt, it is your resume. So once we get to the interview stage, that gets a little bit more complicated, but I think continually tracking your performance and seeing what's working and not working is really, really key in this market.
Is there a certain amount of time that you need to let pass before, you start doing that sort of analysis?
I would say not necessarily time as much as I would say applications, because each application is going to be a data point. I would give each application, let's say we apply to 25 today. If I don't hear back from any of them within 2 weeks, I'm a little suspicious. And then if I don't hear back within the month, I definitely am assuming I'm written off for those. It is really difficult because hiring, especially in the summer, moves very, very slowly. Everybody's out on vacation. It does take a lot longer, so that's a little bit harder. But I would look at the quantity of applications sent more so than time.
Got it. All right, I'm going to jump back into the chat. Another great question from Georgia. What is your best advice to seem genuine and stand out in your resume?
I think it's important, which this is going to sound silly, but I think it's important to still write like yourself, because you are the person that's going to show up in an interview. So when I'm writing my clients' resumes, I always write down 3 words or phrases or qualities that make me think of them. So I just recently had somebody, phenomenal facilitator. She was an amazing communicator. So I wrote down she was bubbly, she was very outgoing. So that way, when I'm writing it, I try to make sure that some of those personality traits are kind of embedded into the resume, which can be quite hard to do. But that person is going to show up at the interview. So if you write as if you're a banker and it's a really stale, rigid resume, that's probably not going to read if you're applying to somewhere that's a little bit more fun and lighthearted. So it's very, very difficult, but trying to think about what those key traits you have are and how you can embed them throughout the whole process.
Yeah, and really read the room. Know who your audience
Definitely.
is. Yeah,
Yes, if you're in
definitely.
banking, do not try to make it fun.
That brings me to like resume formatting. I think in our pre-interview, we talked a little bit about like what a resume should look like, what you should avoid, design mistakes. And we had another great question from Abby about are 2 columns or a sidebar okay on your resume or not? Or does the ATS, immediately discard your resume? So let's just talk from your perspective. What does a good resume look like? And if it is one that's being submitted through the applicant tracking system, what are some things that you would avoid?
Yes, this is a great question. So a good resume is going to have minimal white space and it's going to make it really easy to skim. So the key information should be really, really easy to find. That is another reason, in addition to the applicant tracking system, that I do avoid the 2 columns, just because I've seen on the back end, sometimes it's not that the applicant tracking system will see that you have 2 columns and say, oh, this person didn't listen and reject you, right? That's never going to be the case. But what can happen is when it parses into the system, it might read from left to right. So if you have 2 columns, all of a sudden it's education and then your name and then some work experience and then a random skill. So it can just make it really difficult to read on the back end. Not possible, but just something to keep in mind. So I recommend always just doing 1 column, keeping very clear section headers, using I like to bold things in the bullet points because I try to come up with like a thesis is what I call it for each of the bullet points. So making sure that's bold. So if they are just skimming and looking for things quickly, that is really the name of the game, because recruiters are so flooded with resumes right now that it's really paramount to make sure that it's easy to skim and that all the necessary information is very, very easy to find.
Right. This is another great question. This individual, I think they're a little bit later in their career. This person asked, do you have any suggestions for late career people with decades of experience and how to show that on a resume without kind of ageism kicking in, right? So
Yes.
what is your take on this?
I always recommend matching to the job description. So it's very likely when you're applying to jobs. Again, I like that technique of writing one kind of core resume that you can work with depending on your job and or job title and industry. So I would recommend doing some research on how many years of experience each of those jobs require. So if you're consistently finding that they say between 10 and 12 years, I usually will tailor the resume back to align with that perfectly, because that's all they're asking for. So that's all we need to tell them about. And a lot of times too, they're requiring that number of years of experience because the salary bands are set a certain way. So if they see somebody apply with 25 years of experience, they might think, oh, we can't afford this person. They have too much experience. So that's where you run into that problem where people say they're overqualified. It's likely being assumed that you are just out of that salary band for that particular role.
Yeah, that actually brings a question to mind. Like, it seems like in some cases, some of the information you provide is on a need to know basis. So what are
Mhm.
some other ways where we're like oversharing that we could like pull back a little bit on a
Mhm.
resume?
On a resume, I think we chatted about this earlier, but making sure that even if something is your proudest moment, if it doesn't align to something in the jobs you're applying for, then we don't necessarily need it. So again, if it's a skill that you've developed that isn't required in the jobs you're applying for now, whether I've seen this a lot too with just how fast things are changing with technology, people will be kind of really head down on one skill set. And then when they go to apply to a new job, they realize that skill set isn't really as marketable anymore. So really thinking about what you're applying for and not sharing anything that they're not asking for.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Really quick, I just wanted to touch base with our audience. If you have any questions for Morgan, just drop them in the Q&A box and upvote the ones you like. We're getting some amazing questions on resume writing. Morgan can also take some questions on the job search process in general, interviewing. So we'd love to, if you're in that phase, if you're moving in that phase of the process or you're currently in the interview stages, we'd also love to have those questions as well. Morgan, here's another question that came through. What is the hardest working section of a resume for a recruiter to get a clear sense of who you are?
Mm. This is going to seem very niche, but I think the answer is the companies that you work for, because a lot of times applicants don't put anything to explain the company they've been at. And if you're not kind of at a Fortune 100, it can be pretty confusing. I would say even at the Fortune 100s. Personally, I worked at Honda and we even had, I don't know how many different Honda companies at the time. So each one operates very uniquely and has a very different business model. So the business you sit in can really alter how your day-to-day job looks and how big your impact actually is. So I think what I like to do on my resumes is right underneath the company name, I will do just a one-liner of kind of who they are, who their customers are, and any kind of metric I can include, maybe how many employees they have or how many customers that they have, just something to give them some context on the work that you're doing because it can be really tough and look very, very different depending on where you're at and what the company's focus is.
All right. It's funny. The universe just keeps bringing things back to us. We're around conversations we've had today. This one is from an attendee too, who's been employed at the same company for many
Mhm.
years, but advanced into different roles. We were
Oh,
talking a little
yes.
bit about
Mhm.
this earlier. Myself and our producer, Caitlin, we've been with a company that's gone through several mergers and acquisitions. And so this hits right at home. How can she make sure that sorry, I'm not sure, resume reflects that?
Mm. I think there's kind of two different routes here. So there's one that I think you and I have both been through because at Honda, I also went through a merger where we merged with another Honda company. Very confusing on paper. So if that's the case, if you went through some kind of merger and the actual company name itself has changed, it is important to set those up separately. Just because if a background check goes through, it would show up as two separate employers. So that's a great way to set it up for different mergers and acquisitions. Now, if your job title changed at the same company, there are actually two different ways to tackle that. And it depends on how much your responsibilities changed. So if you have a promotion and really it was just a promotion on paper, you might have taken a few more extra responsibilities, but the core job itself stayed the same. In that circumstance, I will actually stack the job titles. So let's just say senior manager of sales and then regional manager of sales or something like that. Then the bullet points, we can really do whatever we want with. We can really take the best of the best from either of those roles. A lot of times it will be the more senior one. The other option is if those responsibilities are really different, we can split them into two sections. So I would just set it up job title and then the dates around it, and then breaking those bullet points down by role if they are a lot different.
Oh, that's really helpful. I learned a lot there for myself personally. Does it represented the same on LinkedIn? Because that also can be kind of
Mm,
confusing too. What's your take there?
yeah, LinkedIn can be a little bit more difficult. And if I remember correctly, you can still show promotions. That's where the mergers that we talked about can get really sticky. So I do, whether it's on the resume or whether it's on LinkedIn, I think on my own personal resume, it even says, it's impacted by acquisition or impacted by merger, just making it clear that I did not choose to leave this company. This was not me job hopping. This was something that happened externally, which I do think recruiters are becoming more and more aware of, seeing that it feels like it's happening so frequently. But whether it's on your resume or on LinkedIn, just making it clear that this was a larger decision than one that you made.
Yeah. Um, this is another great one. Christy asked, what about trying to find a recruiter? Is there a difference in a resume we submit to a more general recruiter rather than a specific hiring manager?
This is interesting, and I've actually seen a good amount of scams popping up. So
Oh,
I
wow.
will point this out. It was actually one of my clients recently, recruiter, I'll do in quotations, reached out to them and said, we'd love to hire you. We have a really great opportunity. They didn't send the job description or anything, no links. The email looked legit. Even I was tricked by it at first until maybe 3 to 5 emails in, they started saying, your resume is great. The hiring manager loves you, but it's not passing the ATS. It's failing somewhere along the way. And they said, we can set you up with a resume writer to make sure that everything is making it through the system, is what they said. But yes, we realized that that person was trying to scam them and trying to get them to pay for resume writing that they did not need. So definitely be very, very, very cautious with any recruiter in any circumstance. I like to say, I think the best way to apply to a company is always going to be to just go to the company website, the career page. So, you can use different job boards. You can hear about opportunities on LinkedIn, whether through messages or through their job board. But I always recommend going to that company's site just to make sure that one, the job is still active, and two, you're actually applying to the right place. Because there are, I hesitate to call them recruiters, because recruiters typically are working internally to a company. Now, there are people that are reverse recruiters. So they will actually do the work for you of trying to match you with companies. There are headhunters. They might work for different agencies. They're usually placing people higher up. But typically, I would say the job search, I feel, is best managed by the candidate, just because you never know what the payment structure will look like as well. I've seen some people lose a lot of money by trying to outsource that service, and it can be very, very costly. And I would say a pretty high risk of scam.
One thing we had talked about too in the pre-interview is that a lot of people focus a lot of their efforts on the resume writing stage of job
Mhm.
search. You kind of have an interesting rule about how
Oh,
you should be
yes.
spending your time. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yes. In this market, I like to say that we should use 50-30-20, where 50% of your time is spent on cold applications and 30% is spent networking. And 20%, this is the part everybody hates, but is spent on your personal branding, unfortunately. Because I think when we hear personal branding, we immediately think, I don't want to be a LinkedIn influencer, right? I don't want to be a content creator. You absolutely do not have to be. Taking your personal branding is really just taking your reputation in your current company and making it available outside of your current company. So whether that's just a post a week on LinkedIn about something that you learned or an article that is relevant in your industry right now, and then networking, of course, is really important, whether that's just a coffee chat a week, whether that's going to industry events, even if you're going with your current employer, it's always just great to go meet more people. So I would hesitate to tell anybody to rely on cold applications in this market.
Yeah, I wanted to double click on personal branding. Like you said, it can be overwhelming for people.
Mhm.
And you're right. First thing that came to mind when you said it was like, now I have to be a LinkedIn influencer to get
Right.
a job, right? So very like overwhelming, especially for people who are in the later stages of their career and they're not like digital natives. But if you were if you felt like you had semi-weak personal brand currently, what are a couple things that you would do to really strengthen that personal brand?
Mm, I think just exercising creativity can be a really great start. So even if you don't post it to anybody, if you see an article and you have opinions on it, try just jotting those down. I think creativity is a muscle that definitely needs exercise. And even something small like posting on LinkedIn, if you're not used to that, can feel like a huge lift. So just trying to get those muscles activated, start writing things down, just seeing what your opinions are. And I think too, what's really useful is I mentioned earlier that I like to pull different phrases or personality traits from my resume clients, and I usually try to pick three that just remind me of them. I would say that's a really great place to start is how can I get those specific traits kind of somewhere public, somewhere that really showcases that this is who I am, because that's going to make it a lot easier for people to remember you.
Right. That's really, really good advice. And the networking part of the equation too. A lot of people say when you hear networking, they're like, oh, you got to get out, you got to go to an event. What are some alternatives to that for people?
I think that actually something interesting is when you do the personal branding piece, a lot of times people will come to you. I've gotten a lot of people who I feel are way above me, way above my league in terms of where they are in their career, reach out to me because they're interested in something that I said. So I think that can be a huge piece of it. And I also I call it shy girl networking, where you just go on LinkedIn. And even if you feel too nervous to make posts of your own, you can find people in your industry who are already having those conversations and just go to their post, leave a really thoughtful comment. You would not believe how many AI comments are being written right now. So just writing something really thoughtful will be very appreciated. You can go to my page and leave a thoughtful comment. I would love that. So just taking a different approach, whatever you're comfortable with, but it doesn't always have to be a one-on-one coffee chat. It doesn't have to be you going to a big networking event and trying to introduce yourself. There are a lot of ways to get to know people.
I love that shy girl networking.
Yes, it's really intimidating to just start posting when it feels like you're talking to nobody. So just going in and starting some conversations, I feel like is much easier, especially when you're typing and not in person.
I love that. I love that. All right, Morgan. Well, I think that wraps up the Q&A portion of our conversation. I promised our audience a rapid fire Q&A with you. And in fact, again, some of the questions in our rapid fire segment came up in the Q&A. So I'm really excited. So I'm about to get to those. But anyway, I'm going to ask you a series of 3 questions, quick responses, first answer that comes to mind. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What's one thing that would disqualify a candidate immediately?
I think unprofessionalism, whether that's how they show up in the interview or how they write about themselves on their resume or how they show up on LinkedIn.
What's a trend in hiring that needed to die yesterday?
I hate those assessments. The personality test that they have you do before you start, I think it's very disrespectful to the candidate's time.
What's an acceptable form of lying on your resume?
I would say lies of omission, especially when it comes to things like education dates, or like we talked about earlier, if you have 20 years of experience, but the job description is only asking for 12, we don't need, it's not a documentary. It really is a flyer for the jobs you're applying for. We don't need to include it all.
That's all that I had for you. I don't know if there's any of these you wanted to expand on a little bit, but right
Actually,
there.
the lying one is really interesting. I think I made a video about this a couple weeks ago, but there's a very thin line with some of the lies that you can tell. So things like education, right? You never ever want to make up some kind of degree. I've had people say they were really close to a bachelor's degree and they go ahead and put bachelor's on their resume anyway. Things like that are very, very, very easy and common to verify. So I would not make anything up in terms of employers or education. One area that I run into a lot, and I think impacts a lot of job seekers, is the job title. So I actually had somebody recently. I was on a panel here in my hometown. So uh, he said he kept getting rejected and he just couldn't understand why. I looked at his resume. He said he was applying for software engineer jobs and he had been working at 2 smaller businesses. So his title was CEO at one and something like founder, some chief technology officer, something like that. That doesn't make sense. If I'm looking at a resume, I would be confused why a CEO is applying to my software engineering position. So, especially when you have jobs at smaller companies like that, you can absolutely tailor your resume, or sorry, tailor your job title to match what you're applying for. We do want to be careful not to give promotions. We want to be careful not to really stray or make anything up, but job titles can get very, very strange. So making sure that yours actually matches the market. Yeah, that's a very, very thin line to toe, but that is an option, is to play with your job title just a little bit.
Well, thank you for that response. And thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it, Morgan. You're a wealth of knowledge and yeah, just being able to provide this insight into the job market is helpful for so many people right now. It's such a black box. Anyway, I just wanted to thank our audience today. And Morgan, if people are, in the market for a resume writer, or they just want to connect with you, where would they do that?
Yeah, so it's Morgan Sanner on TikTok and Instagram. And then same thing on LinkedIn, just it's Morgan Sanner. And I also recently started a Substack. So that is Work Better on Substack. Yes, we've got 4 articles live now. So that's very new. I'm doing that thing where I'm learning to write and just trying to exercise that creative muscle myself. So
They won't be able to escape you.
exactly, I'm everywhere.
Great. Well, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to Autumn and Caitlin. Caitlin is our producer for the show, and Autumn has been in the comments helping to get your questions answered. And thank you to our audience. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions. The show exists because of you. So we hope you'll scan this QR code on our screen and give us some feedback on today's show. And also tell us what you want to hear about related to the job market next. And the second thing we'll ask you to do today is follow us on LinkedIn so you can be notified of our next upcoming show. Thank you again for joining us today on Ask a Recruiter Live, where we help you navigate a job market that no longer plays by the rules.